it's 7:31, and we'll call the special meeting of the Region 9 Board to order.
Not so fast. Who can lend me a pen or a pencil?
Pencil, is, that's all right?
Whatever, or
Make sure this one works.
okay, great.
Either one is green, though.
That one.
It works. Beautifully. Okay, thank you.
That delay means that Gwen is not late. She's
So are we called to order, or are we not?
We are called to order now at 7:32 with Miss Denny in the room. Okay, and our first orders of business are approval of the minutes from May 21st. That's the regular meeting of this board, and then May 28th, which is the infamous Eastern Reading Region 9 joint meeting. Oh, and there's a third one, the June 6th Region 9 Board of Education special meeting. So I don't know who has, or if everyone has reviewed the minutes, if we want to take them singly or in a group.
Well, take them singly, because I missed two of them, so I will abstain on those, but I'll vote yes on the others, so that's the only.
Okay, so does someone want to make a motion to approve the May 21st Region 9 regular meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any corrections, additions, or discussion needed? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? No. Then we're on to the May 28th Eastern Reading Region 9 Joint Board of Education regular meeting. I want to make a motion to approve those minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second. Since I had nothing to do.
Is there any additions, corrections, or discussion needed on these minutes? Trying to remember, I think Reading did something to them, but I'm not sure. Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Paul will abstain. And that brings us to the special meeting, Region 9 special meeting, June 6th.
I move we approve the minutes.
Maureen beat Paul to the second.
They both beat me up.
Any additions, corrections, or discussions on those minutes? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay. That brings us to item 3, public comment. Is there any member of the public that would like to step up to the podium, give their name, address, and make a public comment?
My name is Suzanne Cribbett. I live at 86 Barlow Drive. I wanted to bring up the subject of dogs. I've heard a rumor that there are concerns about members of the public and their dogs, walking their dogs and going to the bathroom on the school grounds. And, you know, I used to have 2 dogs, now I have 1, and soon I'll have none, but anyway, I've been walking my dogs around here for like 25 years. And I have seen more dogs, more and more dogs over that period of time. There are quite a lot of dogs now. A lot of people drive here, actually. They don't live around here, they drive here, they come here with their dogs. So there are a lot of dogs. And quite a few people don't pick up after their dogs. And I know this is a problem. And I also know that it's really important that people have a place to walk their dogs. So I was going to suggest, and I talked to several neighbors who have dogs and walk them around the school, that we need to come up with a plan, and we talked about it. And I'd like to just, this is very, not official, it's just some neighbors, but we have several, we want to make sort of a casual proposal that we would be willing to, make a post on all the Reading sites like the Patch and Reading 411, things like that. Neighbors now I'm talking, that we aren't serious, in jeopardy of losing freedom to walk our dogs, to have our dogs run, to be around the school because they're pooping everywhere. And that people need to, pick up after their dogs. And the other thing we're willing to do is speak to the people that don't live around here, because they're regulars. There's not like strange people coming from Danbury. These are people who live in the neighborhood somewhere. They come here on a regular basis. We know them, and speak to them and say, look, we may lose this wonderful thing that we have where we can walk our dogs here if we don't, do this, and speak to everybody. So I would like an opportunity to have like a period of time where we could see if we could really do something about this problem, because I see it's a problem, but me and a couple of neighbors, we're willing to really step up and try to make a big change. So I wanted to say that publicly to all of you and anyone else who watches this, that we don't want to lose this ability, and we're willing to do something to change the problem. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Any further public comment? Board member comment? Maureen? Cheryl?
Sorry I'm late.
Paul?
I think that that's a great idea, Suzanne. But I would suggest talking to Gina and Walter about it.
I'd just add, nothing's preventing the immediate neighbors from making such posts. I'm thinking, I would be surprised if anybody objected to that, to publicize the idea that you can't abuse the opportunity, privilege, whatever you want to call it.
Glenn? Dan?
Yeah, it's a privilege I've taken advantage of, so I totally agree with you, and it would be helpful, I don't know whether there's any appetite for this, but it's always also helpful to have one of those little boxes with bags, and to have signs that remind people of their obligation, basically.
Also have signs that remind people that we have cameras.
Yeah.
We have a lot of cameras now.
One of the groups in the building, students that works with dogs and adoption and so on, so actually purchased two of them, which we installed. They have bag dispensers and the they actually purchased bags.
Where are they?
One is right down at the entrance to the walking path,
Mm-hmm.
and the other we put up right up near the text
Well, thanks to them for doing that.
That was the Pause for a Cause group.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have a wonderful president. Yeah, that's leaving. Okay, that brings us to item 5A, which is the 2018-19 fiscal year operating budget report.
So I'd like to start with the health insurance reserve, which should be in your packet, one for Region 9, one for central office. So that we understand how that's looking for the year. So in the Region 9 version of this, we have actual claims through the month of May. That's our average year-to-date year-to-date claims per month this year at $192,000 a month, which is down from last year's average at 221, so it's down materially. It's down 30K average per month. We have one more month to go, so of course there's a potential for that average this year to change, but it won't change by a lot since it's 1 month out of 12. So by any measure, this year is materially improved over last year in terms of total claims that we had, which has really worked to the benefit of the health of the reserve account. 2 months ago, I worked with Brown & Brown to get their help to do the best assessment outlook that I could get of the last 2 months, May and June, of what claims would be. And I also have worked with them to get whatever latest data they could get me about June, even though June's not official yet. We'll get the official stuff in the next probably 5 to 10 days to close June out. But nonetheless, I have a peek at June. And the interesting news is their May-June forecast was basically right on, which is good news. So it looks to me like we're going to close out this year with a reserve of $630,000 in this reserve account, which is also an improvement from where we have been. The gauge for that is the recommendation would be to keep a 2 to 3 month average claims reserve buffer in the account, and if our average claims are around 200,000, then twice that's 400, 3 times that's 600. So in the 400 to 600 range, and we're looking to end really at the high end of that this year. So it's a very healthy position for this account. Next year we'll have, this was a year where we had about half of the employees in the high deductible plan. Next year we'll see a significant movement of more of the population going to the high deductible plan. So that behavior, I'm sure, is a part of what we're seeing. So I would anticipate seeing another good year, all things being equal. High claims can happen at any time for any reason, but broadly speaking, the shift to the high deductible appears to be yielding results we thought that it would. So that's the Region 9 account. If there aren't any questions on that, I'll cover the central office one.
Remind me, Scott, we do have a match as a district to fund an HSA on an ongoing basis.
Yeah.
For high deductible participants.
Right, so in the first year for the certified staff, I believe that this is right because we have like a dozen of these. The board would fund 70% of the deductible in the first year and 50% of the deductible in the second and third years. So our deductible obligation, or our funding obligation will drop a little bit as they begin to build their own reserves in their account.
But the reserve and the risk associated doesn't change.
Say that again?
In other words, our funding obligation changes, but the risk associated with being self-insured, so that reserve doesn't change, so it wouldn't, call for a reduction in the reserve.
That's really intended to, the purpose of the reserve is, the reality is claims are unpredictable, claims will vary, claims can be very high for a month or 2 or 3, and you need a little bit of buffer. It's like you don't want your checking account to have $5 at the end of the month in it. You want it to have a little bit in case you overspend that month, and blah, 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 And this is very much like a checking account. In fact, we deposit money in basically monthly from the operating budget according to the budget allocated amount, and then the claims come in weekly, and we pay them as they come in. On the central office side, similarly, the Brown & Brown estimate was really right on what they had said that it would likely be for the last 2 months. So I'm anticipating, I'd been sharing with the boards that I thought that this account would end about $90,000 underfunded by the end of June, and I'm going to stick with that. We'll get the final numbers in and be able to figure it out, but that's very much what it continues to look like, is that we're going to be 90,000 underfunded at the end of June on this account. So as we've discussed in a variety of meetings, tri-board as well as individual board meetings, the approach I would take is whatever that final balance at the end of June calculates out to be, I would divide it by 3, and each district would fund a third of that deficit to bring it back to zero. Starting with, preliminary.
So is that smart, just to bring it back to zero?
That was my question too.
It would be smart to make it a reserve, however, the conversation I've had with 2 of 3 boards so far this month in their end-of-year views has been to bring it to zero. So I feel obligated to bring it to zero based on the discussion that I've had.
That comes out of our reserve, and,
It would come from the unexpended funds in the budget.
okay.
So it looks like then we're about $120,000 overspent on that this year, because we have to, if we're down 90, right, at the end of the year, we started with 32, right, didn't we?
Yeah. Mhm.
So it's about 120 over.
Yeah, we've had really about 24 months, 18 to 24 months of very, very high claims, like triple normal claims. I have the sense that this is going to begin to abate, and that we will see probably a return to more of what we've seen in the past, with the usual caveats of anything could happen. In addition to that, our central office budget contribution for next year to this account will increase.
I was gonna ask or make sure that it's zero only in the sense of at the end of this year, of this fiscal year, it's zero. But there's a funding provision for, so you're not starting with,
No, literally next week, we will make the first contribution from 1920.
But there's funding for the plan. Is there funding for the reserve?
Not specifically, it's an allocation to
So-
pay estimated claims.
So the only thing that will go into that reserve would be any overflow associated with the plan, or there wouldn't be anything put into that reserve?
So in the central office budget, we have a line item for medical plan contributions.
I got that, yeah.
That's the amount that will go in. So that's the amount that we contributed to the fund, in addition to employee contributions, retiree contributions.
so there's
But
no, so the point is, there's no built-in cushion.
It doesn't go to the reserve, it goes into the fund.
Well, the reserve, it goes into the fund, it's really one account, I guess the reserve or the buffer
Overflow.
is the unspent amount at the end of any given month. It's not a separate portion of the account.
So then the question would be, based on the information that we know, is there reason to believe or to suspect that health insurance at central office may run lean again next year?
We'll be okay knowing what I know now, but anything could happen.
Brown and Brown have any window on that?
Not per se. I can tell you that when we budget this and when they give me estimates for central office, they're very nervous and would like to see our central office contributions significantly higher. And the reason for that is it's a very small pool. So with a very small pool, one event can be outsized, as opposed to the very large pool, you have many events, and it's still not impact everything overall. So that's their concern. But in all honesty, it's such a sizable amount, I'm not comfortable bringing it forward into the budget process, because it's not what we've done historically, and we've been okay. I think that this is the first year that I see anyway that we've run negative, except for several years back, 5 years back. So it has increased. The allocation this year was about $95,000. If memory serves, it's like $125,000 for next year. So it's up. And that was me taking the Brown and Brown input, not going all the way to what they recommended, but bringing it up a material amount to build up a buffer.
So you're saying this year's budget looks to be about $30,000 for the entire year, higher than it was last year?
1920 budget, $30,000 higher than it was.
So if we have the same thing, we'll only be down 90,000.
Well, we won't be down. We'll start the year at zero. We'll add
Yes,
in
but if the
our,
claims are the same as they were this year, then we would be down 90,000. Because you're increasing it by 30, we're we basically, if we wanted to do the same thing as this year and keep it flat, 120,000 would be what we would need to increase the budget by. So for increasing it by 30, that leaves 90 that we would be in the hole in if everything happened the same way in terms of claims.
The 90 and the 30 aren't additive. The 30 that we discussed is your one-third portion of the 90.
Oh, it is, okay, so it is 90 then, so then we would, okay. All right,
93 raises 30.
yep, okay. That's a better answer, yep, than what I thought was happening, so fine, thank you.
Any other questions on that? The next thing I have is actually to request a transfer. Before I get into the details of where I think the year is going to end, I have a transfer request for this year's operating budget, and it is for $10,800, so it's just above the $10,000. And the purpose of the transfer is to fund the additional transportation necessary for postseason athletic games beyond the normal athletic budget. So the estimated additional costs incurred for student transportation for the postseason games, which are to some extent predictable. You're never quite sure who's coming up and how far and where specifically you need to travel to, is to take $10,800 out of our special ed transportation account, which is $1,205, where we have excess funds due to reduced need for special ed transportation, and to move it to the 1125-510, which is the athletics transportation account.
Well, I have a question, maybe a concern relating to this. So, as we go through the budget process, I think one of the adjusted areas was postseason athletic transportation. It was one of the areas that was reduced as we were formulating the budget. And so then at the end of the year, we say we really can't estimate how many postseason buses we're going to need or what happens. And so my question is that related to, gee, we're doing well this year, so we gave some buses that we didn't really plan to give buses for? Or is it we plan to give these buses, but they cost more money than we thought they were going to cost? Or in other words, how do we get 10,000? Was there a singular event or something that was a big surprise that we definitely felt the need to do the bus, in other words? And I know that's probably something you can't answer, but
I could speak to that a little bit.
okay.
Well, like, for instance, baseball hasn't gone to states in 20 or 30 years, so I don't think anybody was predicting that baseball was going to go to states this year. And then when they go to states, they got to get there. So, I mean, I think, you know, when they advance further, they have extra games, and the games are often far away. And so you don't know that necessarily at the beginning of the year that they're going to have
Right.
extra games.
Yeah, I just wondered, because I think last year there was a similar type large transfer at the end of the year for postseason transportation as well. And so I'm just wondering whether this is a way of doing business or whether this is an anomaly.
I think it's a budgeting challenge, and the budgeting challenge is you could assume a high number and end up not using it and have a lot of unexpended funds, or you could assume a low number and be fortunate to have a lot, or you could maybe hit it right in a year. I think it's probably fairly unpredictable. I would say, and I'm not, in honesty, that close to the budgeting methodology here. To me, the only way really to do it would be to look at historical averages and just say, on average, over the last 5 years, we've tended to do about this much. So if it's another average year, then we would budget that much again. And you could be high, you could be low, depending on how reality turns out.
I know I'm making a big deal of it. I'm just saying that maybe it's something we should keep an eye on, because, again, I'll just use a while, just so CDAs made it, and they went somewhere to the, and did the school pay for the bus to get them there? Or did they fund their own bus, and then when the baseball team makes it to the States, and then we need to get a bus for the baseball team? I just would seek equity and fairness, so I think that it's something we should kind of keep a closer look at and see whether or not this is the way we're going to do it every year. We're going to end up where come summer, we're going to have $10,000, $15,000 worth of transfers for athletic transportation. And if that's happening every year, then maybe we're under budgeting athletic transportation.
Well,
and
when we go through the budgeting process of the buckets, the 7 buckets we have, athletics is one of the smaller buckets, and I think every year we tend to take money out of that.
no,
And I think a disproportionate amount comes out of the athletics because it's easy.
well, and I'm not really, I guess I'm just looking for clarity, because it's, any way you slice it, it's money that wasn't budgeted that's being used for an overage, right? And so if we're historically under budgeting that number, we should probably look at it closer and try to do a better job forecasting that, because, again, it can be perceived, you use the example nobody wants to hear, but we could have said, well, we thought we had enough iPads, but we realized we needed another 50 at the end of the school year, it's...
Just to that point, I would agree with you, Mike, and certainly I agree with the equity and the parity, right? People have already heard me say the pay-to-play should be equitable, regardless of what activity you're gonna do, or offsets by boosters. So that aside, I think from the budgeting perspective, what if we didn't have that excess in transportation for special ed? Where would, we didn't have a line item to transfer, then, we could be under. I mean, again, it's not a large amount, but it's more the concept of budgeting. And if we need more to support the programs that we decide to do, then we need more, right? So, yeah.
So anyway, I'm sorry for going...
Yes, and
on a
for the
little
record, I don't think that drama kids should have to pay their own way to their competition any more than athletes should have to pay their way to states either. But I think there are many ways that our drama department could be better funded, and it's a topic for another season.
That's a definitely next year budgeting question, how we fund the programs we want to keep, right?
So you
Totally agree with that, Greg.
you open this door, and then you have to contemplate, all right, if we have Barlow kids competing under whatever aegis of the Falcon, do you then say, okay, the debate team, there's a couple dozen buses, how about the math team or the chess team? Like it is something for you to think about, so I urge you to remember this when you get to the end of the budget cycle next year and you're looking to take another 1/10% off the bottom.
Right, but we never tell where to take 10%. That's usually a recommendation, so
Well,
I'm,
right.
I'm looking at it that we should probably,
Keep it at a higher priority.
well, yeah. Again, I don't want to kill this thing. I just think if we put a better eye on it, I think would be helpful.
We're looking for a motion to approve the transfer.
Yes, we are.
Oh, in that case, I will move,
Risking it.
Second.
I will move to, is it
10,008.
even?
1,800.
Okay. Move to approve the transfer of $10,800 from the special ed transportation budget to the athletic transportation budget.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, it's unanimous.
what's coming around the table is a discussion sheet, a couple of discussion sheets about end of year. So on this first sheet, I wanted to give you a view of where I thought the total unexpended funds was going to come in and what the drivers were for what made that up, where we saw spending under the budget, where we saw spending over the budget, and talk through each of those. I've talked, I think, in probably every board meeting that we've had since February about where I think the unexpended funds are going to land at the end of this year. So the number that you see here is at the bottom, 782,000 is my estimate of what I anticipate the unexpended funds to be. That ends up being a little higher than I had previously anticipated it being. I think the reason it's a little higher is when I do my outlooks, I have to assume worst case. So actually, Cheryl, to the example that you brought up of what if we didn't have the money to do this and we didn't have a place to take it from, well, that's really my job much earlier in the year, because if I'm at all feeling like that, I'm going to start instituting spending controls very, very deeply, cutting out anything that, and I have done this in other districts, if it, if I feel it's that sharp of an issue, if it's not contractually obliged, if it's not necessary to the safe operation of schools, we just literally would not expend the money on it, even if it were budgeted. So we weren't anywhere near that this year any time, so I never got close to saying that kind of thing. That said, my forecasting approach is, well, what's the worst that could happen? What's the most spending that could occur? So we've seen less than the most spending that could have occurred, which is why this number is 782 versus the 700-ish or so that I was talking about earlier in the year. So I know you understand all of that. So we could talk just a little bit then about what's up, what's down, and some of the drivers for that. So in the upper left, you see an estimate of $290,000 underspending in salaries. So this is all of the salary lengths, every single one of them. So it involves certified salary, non-certified salary, other payments, substitute payments, FICA, med, payrolls, all of those types of things. They're often very interrelated because they're oftentimes a function of one another. But there were some big changes that had occurred throughout the year, and I mentioned some of this earlier in the year when I had discussed really earlier in the year the major items that I had discussed as driving the underspending was breakage in the salary lines and reduction of outplacements in special ed, which led to savings both in the outplacement tuition as well as the outplacement transportation. But a little more specifically to salaries, long-term absences, both medical and maternity types of absences were a big driver this year, more than anticipated. We had two staff members resign, one in November, one in December, a very special role, speech and language pathologist. It proved impossible ultimately to staff that role through the balance of the year. So we did shift to minimal staff using outside services to make up the requirement through the balance of the year, but we certainly spent less than the budget would have called for had they remained in place. We had higher paid staff who resigned as the budget was getting underway, and their replacement staff was a materially lower amount. We had budgeted for staff achieving a degree change, which would have shifted them into a higher salary lane at a materially higher salary. That did not come to pass, so that was additional available funding there. So those types of things is what comprises that 290. On transportation, it's the lower out-of-district special ed transportation than budgeted based on change in student needs. In addition, annually, with the bus runs, the regular bus runs, the regular home-to-school bus runs, they're budgeted also based on an historical average, but reality occurs every August when you know exactly who you need to transport, and more importantly, where you need to transport them from, which is the major driver in this geography, because it all comes down to time, getting students from where they are to good news is that we were able to run the regular home-to-school routes with one fewer route this year than we had previously, due to just the geographic layout of where students were. That may or may not occur this coming year, may or may not occur on any given year. So that was two pieces. It was the special ed changes in services and reduction of one regular run. On the outplacements of 110, one of the things that happened at this time last year in the 17-18 budget was we pre-funded a $35,000 settlement payment that was in the 18-19 budget. We used 17-18 funds to pay for that at that time. So that's 35 of the 110. And the balance of that is the student outplacements that were reduced that we covered earlier.
Like the floor machine too, right?
Yeah, I don't know that that was a budgeted item, was it? Okay. Then yes, then. But yes, we did buy that. Outside services, this 70K unanticipated unspent, this is a mix of, it would appear we're going to underspend what we would have anticipated spending on legal. This is, the legal expenditure is absolutely a case where you just need to look at historical averages. It is truly unpredictable. So I look at multi-year averages and sort of pin it at where things appear to be trending and place it at that. But another portion of this is special ed outside services for evaluations and that kind of thing, and not as many of those were used as were anticipated to be in the original budget. And then beyond that, there were multiple lines. In fact, there were 24 additional lines, each of them less than 20K on spend, but it adds up, obviously. So that's 175 underspent there on each of those individually. So that's 875 total underspent. Overspending, the first line on the 30,000 is a number that I've put in. That's the funding for the central office overrun in the central office health reserve account that we talked about. So I've, in essence, already added it as a planned expense in our operating budget. It hasn't happened yet, and it won't happen until I actually know what the number is. When I have the final number, then I'll change that 30,000 payment to the central office employee benefit account to whatever it actually is, which I don't higher than 30 and is likely to be lower than 30. In the pension area, we had some overspending made up of two things. Some of it budgeting process piece, and some of it a changeover that we've been working on for some time for our defined contribution plan to move it from MetLife to a new provider, Horace Mann. So taking that piece first, there are some fees associated with that, so that about 5,000 of that 25 is associated with that cutover. And the balance of it, the 20, there's a portion of the pension also related to the defined contribution plan where employees who are eligible for it receive 4% of their salary deposited into their pension account. They can optionally choose to contribute 3% of their own money. The board would match the 3%. So what we needed to have done was budget the full 4% and the full 3% for every eligible employee, because you don't know. We know the 4. What we don't know is the 3, of whether employees would choose that or not. So in essence, we saw overruns because we need to match and pay that out, and we didn't have sufficient budget to do that in this budget, which we've corrected for 1920. And then lastly, the heating oil component, which I think I talked about very early in the budget season, because this was a function of the strike price of oil being materially higher than we had budgeted for, which we budgeted for the exact amount that we had anticipated it to be.
Did you skip over certified substitutes?
I did, sorry about that, yes.
'Cause my question was, why wouldn't that, if it's certified substitutes, and when you were talking about the underspending, and you talked about salaries, you said it included substitutes.
It included the non-cert subs. It didn't include the cert subs because I wanted to pull it out separately. Because we had some of those extended absences, extended leaves of absence, which 111 certified staff salary line, we had long-term subs to fill in for them, which caused the certified sub line to go over to make up for that. So I pulled that apart. So salaries contained everything except for that one line there.
So if I'm looking at the unders, and just rough numbers, it looks like close to half, at least half, of the underspending can be attributed to the special ed department somehow, whether it's transportation or salaries or legal or evaluations. Would that be correct?
I don't know the exact split on the transportation between home to school versus special ed. I would have to look at that. But if we assume it's half of that,
It's somewhere close to about half, I would say.
it's at least 300.
Okay.
The certified subline, did I miss, what's the reason why that,
Long-term absence is the regular certified staff line. So it,
and that's just here, because I know there was big shortfalls in other districts in certified subs as well. So it's not related to pulling teachers from classrooms or anything like that. It's directly related to long-term absences.
the other district, in all honesty, it was a budgeting issue.
Budgeting. Okay.
So that's where we are and why. The second page of this is a discussion starter for potential uses of this. So places that money can go for regional district is the capital reserve fund, the capital reserve fund, and the pension fund. Capital reserve fund transfer is limited to a maximum of 1% of the total budget, so I put that number in for you, the 242, 404, 92, just so you knew what the calculation was. Against the medical reserve fund, for context, I pulled out next year's planned contributions to the medical reserve fund, $2.5 million, and similar to the pension fund. Planned contribution to the pension fund for 1920 is a little over 200,000 per the actuarial report. The last item here is a recommended expenditure for some humidifiers. I don't bring this to you lightly. Mike alluded earlier in a conversation about buying a bunch of IMAX at the end of the year, and that would not be the right thing to do. This came to me several weeks ago from the administrative team. We talked about it. I'm supportive of it. I think it's a good idea. It's within my authority to approve, but I thought it more prudent really to bring the conversation here to you. I think that it's, we know that this is an issue in this building and we encountered it late last summer and early fall throughout the building, and had to take, in fact, some emergency measures to get some commercial dehumidifiers in to address the issue, and we had the health department come in and all those good things. So we know it's an issue, and so for not a lot of money, we could be a little more proactive and a little bit more self-sufficient. The recommendation here is for 7 units. 6 of them are smaller units, less than 300 apiece. One of them is a much larger unit that would handle significantly higher capacity. Could be taken to hotspot type areas, also portable and could be moved around. So it seems like a very reasoned approach for something that I think makes sense for the building. It's not a new thing. The items will last forever. Well, their useful life, which is a significant amount of time. Anyway, so that's the background on it.
Yeah, so it's fair to assume that the dehumidifiers are a preventive measure that could help us avoid the incurred expenses last year for testing and for remediation when those high humidity events occur.
We had to rent the units last.
And I would imagine the expenses exceeded $4,500.
More than likely, off the top of my head, I don't know if
Well,
you recall.
again, just this, right, so I don't think this is like buying extra stuff you don't need at the end of the year. I think you can make a case that this is a preventive measure that's gonna save us long-term based upon, you know, empirical evidence that this has happened before and probably will happen again, this summer.
Definitely happen again.
But, yes, Jan?
Does this adequately address the
Well,
problem?
that's where I was going next, yes.
Is there a systemic solution, or is it, because this seems like a spot solution?
Most of the problems we have where we have carpeted areas, in some ways it's an even bigger problem for us, because of clean carpets, you have nice drain through them. So problematic areas, these would be able to run as needed, and the one big unit can actually fill 29 gallons a day of moisture out. So as we're going through the cleaning areas where it's not, abnormally problematic, it could be cleaned and also keep the carpets drier faster.
So you have a need for spot drying, I guess, is
We have some.
what you're saying, as opposed to,
Alleviate the
yeah.
problems, it's just, the air handling systems that we have, it just can't quite handle it. Now, unfortunately, our weather pattern seems to be getting worse and getting, more humid. So last summer killed us with this COVID.
but
And we ran into Wyatt to try and handle it.
it also sounds like your people are gonna be moving dehumidifiers around.
Some of what we found out works really well is our problematic areas. We mount them in the rooms with, these small units actually have pumps on them, so they can constantly pump and drain themselves, so we don't have to, spend a lot of time with them. The big unit will be moved where we need it, and if we do have problem areas beyond these, what we look at is the areas that are always problematic for us, and this should handle what we have on a constant basis. We might have to shift them on occasion, but I don't see where it's gonna be somebody constantly moving these.
Okay.
Where do we have most of the carpeted areas that are a problem? Besides, I mean, this is,
This room with even with the units in here, we still have, and I certainly report to Scott, about, we have both the amount of humidity, we have to further maintaining it, we're low enough over here. This room next door to us, all of our office suites and, guidance suites are carpeted areas, the auditorium is a carpeted area, and then most of our computer labs.
Okay, so,
are there any areas that we can eliminate carpet because we really don't need it?
Trying very hard to do that.
But,
We've been looking at the pricing of it. Eventually, with the exception of like this room here and maybe like the main areas, the main hallways in the, main corridors, like in office and stuff like that, I would like to try and get the carpet out. Carpet's just a really bad health issue to begin with, and it's problematic. So as it wears and we can replace it, we are looking at other solutions. We tried it in a couple of offices last year. The results have been excellent. So we're looking at pricing, to do all of guidance, all of, the main office, and, we look at that as one, as one area for pricing, and then, we can figure out basically a square foot price. But we would definitely like to get the carpet if we can, it would alleviate a lot of problems.
Would that alleviate the problem in general? Is that the root cause, or is it really the ventilation, the moisture, and et cetera?
The ventilation to a point, it's mostly our carpeted areas that we have the problems in, mostly. We have had problematic rooms, in corners and stuff like that, and two rooms that we, had a problem, one was a room that many years ago we pulled the carpet out because the room flooded, and we had to break the pipe in the ceiling, and the final solution of a couple of years ago, we put one of these small units in that room permanently, and it's made all the difference in the world.
so,
Sounds good to me.
yeah, well, I'm in favor. The one thing I would like to ask a little more, how many of these are gonna be permanently mounted in classrooms, where do they drain and how does that go?
Every one with the exception of the large one, we have designated rooms already that we've looked at, that we want to put those into. Most of them, it's just a small, just like,
No, I know how they drain, but where do they drain?
oh, we run right up the wall into the ceiling, we bring them right into, existing drains in the ceiling. Easily permanent, to the point of people are moving around when we have to, we pull it quickly, we can pull them out and use them standalone in other areas.
And so you mount them on the walls, or they're on the floor?
The units themselves are on the floor, we run the plastic tubing up the wall and clips and in. We've been very happy with the results in these particular units that, we purchased before, the same ones we wouldn't buy, they've worked excellently for us.
So we're not gonna be putting carpet in any places?
I would love to get, as we get ready to replace carpet, I would love to look at options, under the carpet.
Are there any rooms we have to have carpet in?
I have one, guidance office right now that we had, a flooding due to a broken pipe in the hallway, and even though it's, we completely remediated, the carpet stained pretty badly, and we're still having problems with that, so, that one room I would like to try to do up.
No. My question was, are there any rooms in the building that we are required or need or
Oh,
would
I'm sorry,
like to maintain carpeting in it?
No, not that I'm aware of by.
But the music rooms to absorb some of the
Or
sound?
the auditorium? I'm just trying to understand where we need carpeting.
For the sound deadening, I would say probably those, but I don't think there's actually a, legal,
Statute.
legal standard for it. It says you have to have carpeting in these rooms. Obviously, those rooms are, freshly carpeted.
Which ones?
These, chorus room and music room,
When were they carpeted?
years ago.
So why would we carpet that if we knew that it was a problem?
Those were carpeted because of, like you said, because of the types of rooms.
But we're gonna change our mind on those?
Those we would leave. The classrooms, computer rooms, stuff like that, standard rooms, there's really no reason to have carpet in them.
Okay, so does someone want to make a motion to request the finance director to allocate $4,500 of the unspent funds to purchase 7 dehumidifiers to prevent potential moisture damage?
I will.
Or second?
Second.
Is there any further discussion? All in favor?
I'd like to just follow up on this in September, because I know that I'm familiar with some of the impacts that this had on students last summer, the moisture issue, so I just want to make sure that we're really getting the result that we want, and if we need to do more, that we are able to know about it ASAP so we can get you what you need, because this is, it's not a good thing.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, unanimous. So, now we circle back to the
Rest.
other area options that Scott has detailed here. So, I apologize because I was listening, but I was also distracted. So, the pension, if we were to designate some of the unspent balance to the pension, that has to be done by June 30th. And that would allow us to greatly reduce the contribution for next year.
so that we've,
Or moving forward is a better way of saying it.
Well, it might and it might not, but it would likely help in that regard.
They don't
Would be
come up with a
my-
number until
Yeah, that,
later.
Scott, I'm sorry, I stepped on it. Your answer's probably better than mine.
well, there's a couple moving parts. So the actuary says, effective July 1, you should deposit $200,877,000 in your account for the 1920 year. That's based on their actuarial calculations of benefits required to be paid. So that's a known number that comes directly from them. To the extent that,
And that's already in the budget.
that is in next year's budget, yep. So the extent that we pay some or all of that number out of this year's funds, the deposit is going to happen effectively at the same time as it would have otherwise. But it would have the effect of freeing up that same amount of money in next year's budget to be otherwise directed by the board to any other required means.
Yeah, but if I could add a footnote, that there has been a discussion at the pension committee to use more conservative assumptions of returns. And if you're familiar with public pension issues, there have been, I think, justifiable criticism of certain public pension funds assuming aggressive returns, like in the 8% range. There's two pieces to it. One is the assumption of the returns, and one is the assumption of compensation increases. And so obviously, if you assume a lower annual comp increase, that will affect, you can sort of balance it up and down or not. We had a study done, kind of a what-if analysis, where, if we, and what is the current pension return assumption? I think it's
6%.
7, well, what is it, 6 3/4?
Yeah.
Okay. It was moved down under the previous pension committee when Wally came, was emphatic about being more conservative on the return assumption. At the same time, the compensation assumption is somewhere in the 4% area, which is, over the last number of years, that is far higher than. So my guess would be that, just to finish the story, the amount of the pension contribution recommended by the actuaries will change depending on the assumptions. Generally speaking, the more conservative the return assumption, the higher the annual contribution needs to be. So what I'm guessing, and I can't promise you this because we haven't taken any action on it, but my guess would be that if we go anywhere, it will be toward the more conservative return assumptions and will thus drive a higher actuarially recommended pension contribution in future years. It will not affect the 1920 budget, but at the same time, if you sort of pre-fund some of that, conceptually, that could conceivably help cushion the increase in the out years, if you follow. And if someone, was gonna ask me which way it's gonna go, my guess is it's gonna go that way. So, bottom line, it wouldn't hurt to allocate, I don't think, allocate some money to the pension fund over and above what has already been allocated.
Is there any intent for the committee to recommend a different compensation increase, or an actuary to recommend a different, because that seems high?
They do
Because
that.
that would overstate the liability as
They-
well.
they all-
We go the other way, right?
The proposed approach of the committee was to, today's approach is the actuary comes forward in the October timeframe with these numbers. That feeds the budget cycle. The change that the committee is taking is to have the discussion with the actuary over the summer, before the October thing, to have the conversation conversation about whether or not altering those assumptions makes sense.
I can also
Which will
tell you,
drive this down.
and I'm going by memory, is that if you take, let's say you move the assumption down, like from 4 to 3 and from 6 3/4 to 6 1/4, let's say. The net difference is gonna be in the area of $100,000 per year. Now, I'm going by memory here, but I mean, it's not trivial. It's not trivial. So even if you move the comp assumption down a little bit, if you also move the return assumption down, because that's got a heavier weight. So,
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I remember as well, and
Yeah.
it's if you get all of your assumptions maybe a little closer to reality, you're gonna go up slightly. But Scott, even given the assumptions that we have now, do you, off the top of your head, or remember what the funding percentage is? And I know there are a couple of different methodologies, an old methodology, a new methodology, but I suspect we would still be getting, we'd still be on the underside of 100, even if we added some money.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you should never have it 100% funded,
Right.
never. You don't
Well, you don't want it over 100% funded, but,
Well, you shouldn't, because you're talking about the time value of money.
well, no, it's not, but 100% funded is not, I mean,
It's not a real number.
it's not having all of the money in the fund that you'll ever need. It's having enough, given the assumptions, that you'll get there.
Right. But when Chris brought up the fact that many pension funds are underfunded, many of those funds are 40%.
Right, no, I get it.
30%. And those are horrible numbers. When you're talking somewhere between 90 and 100, I don't want to say it's insignificant, but you're much better off than certainly where we were back in 2003 and 4. We are light years ahead. Plus, the actuaries come back every year and look at it. It's still based on our assumptions, and those assumptions, like Chris said, can change our funding request from 200, just say 200,000 to 450,000 fairly easily. And over time, you want to be honing those in. You don't want big adjustments on that. You don't want to move it from 4% to 5% or 4% to 3%. The actuaries don't like that either. They want you to slowly go in the proper direction. But one of the things about overfunding the pension that I recall now is that we fund two pensions, central office pension and our own pension here. And so when we were topping up, when we had money left over at the end of the year and we were adding to the pension funds, we started to realize because we split the central office 3 ways, we were actually overfunding the central office as well, because I don't think we split that out. Am I incorrect in that?
We do split it out, but you're accurate. The way the actuarial, so let me back up. The eligible retirees who are eligible employees who are members of this plan span 3 primary groups. One is support staff here in Region 9, Joel Barrow High School. One is central office staff who were eligible at the time, and a very small pool of cafeteria workers that goes back something like 15 years at the time that they were eligible. There
They
are
were
10.
from Reading, though, right?
Not all of
from
them.
here.
There were 10 of them total. Half of them were from the building, and the other half were from the Reading district.
Oh, okay. That's-
5 and 5. So each of those 3 groups are actuarially determined. There's a calculation that's done for each of the 3. So how much obligation does the Region 9 group, how much obligation does the central office group have, how much does the cafeteria group have? I'll read you this. I anticipated the discussion, so I brought the page from the actuarial report. This says, currently there are no active cafeteria participants covered by the plan because under the plan's funding method, the liability of the cafeteria participants is considered to be fully funded, and there is no normal cost allocated to the group. So for all intents and purposes, that group is a non-entity financially in regards to funding the plan. The balance of it comes down to there are 119 total members. We take those 10 out. That brings us down to 109. And of those 109, 96 are in this building, Region 9, are 88%, and 13 are in the central office, or 12% of the employee pool. That's not necessarily a dollar breakout, but it's a body breakout. So yes, you're right. So when we put in 200,877, that's for the Region 9 amount.
Just for the
Just
Region
for
9.
Region 9. So I
Not
take
for both amounts.
the central office number on the same page is a little over 58,000. That's in the central office budget.
Because I think when Peggy was here, we were just, it went to cover all of it. It wasn't, she didn't break it out just to do the,
At the end of the day, all the dollars are in the same fund because it's the same investment pool to service, you know.
No, it might be marginal, but the growth associated with the extra money that we put in does reduce the obligations of the other districts as well, right?
so how do you determine how much the
In
other
other words, you know, if the more we put in, the more the fund grows, you know, it might be marginal, but it's.
Yes, it does.
But I will say that of all of the bodies that, well, central office could, right? But certainly, of all of the bodies that are contributing to this, we're
We're
probably
both
the more
towns,
appropriate
correct.
one because
Correct. We're
Both
both towns,
towns,
it's not,
yeah.
nobody's getting, an advantage, yes, I agree.
One other comment in regards to the discussion we're having about the actuarial assumptions and the timing. If we go down a thought process that says pre-fund from this year's dollars, next year's contribution of 200K, we will receive an actuarial report in the October timeframe. That actuarial report will give us the numbers based on any assumption changes that the committee determines before that. And they actually give us two numbers. They give us a number as of the day of the calculation, October 1 or whatever it is. But then they do a forward time value of money and give me the June 30th version of it. That's the number I put into the budget because I know it needs to feed the following year's budget cycle. My point being that in the October timeframe, we could have this conversation again in regards to the spare 200 that we now have available because we already paid for it, and make a decision and say, and it'll be the same breakout. It'll show the Region 9 portion, it'll show the Board of Ed portion. And a similar conversation can occur about, does it make sense to do any pre-funding of that using this money?
And I always forget which of these options requires a decision by June 30th.
Pension.
Pension does for certain. I would say it's really best practice for me to do all of them. And the reason for that, over the last 2 weeks, across all three boards, and this one, tomorrow is dedicated to taking any action we decide tonight and getting it set in the financial system, because my objective is by June 30th to have as many things, you know, there are things I can't predict, like what the actual electric bill will be, but I have an encumbered amount that's my estimate of that. But things where we're taking action on, I think we should do it before June 30th.
Well,
So,
Scott, do you have recommendations on these?
he's got them there, I think.
Well, I didn't really put,
Not recommending 2 million for the medical.
No, that's what the budget
Sorry.
is, yeah.
so, I mean, I think the path that's open to the board is really to take everything into capital that you can, the 242. We made the decision on the dehumidifiers, and then determine between the remaining areas how much of, partially or all of the remaining balance to put into each of those two individually. And the thought process, in essence, would be your prepaying an obligation that you have for next year in regards to medical reserve funding and pension funding. You can revisit each of those at any time or all the time through the 1920 year to determine what to do with those. So, for example, we could say, we're having a really bad medical claims year, we're going to continue to contribute additional money above what we had originally budgeted because we have the room to do that now. Or we could say, special ed has changed materially, we now have some flexibility and some funds to send that way. We had to add an extra bus above and beyond what we thought because X, Y, Z, right?
So, yeah, so, I think in the past, we did at one point give money back to the towns. We found that really seems, that the towns take it, they put it in their reserve accounts. Nobody remembers it the next year, and, it really, it doesn't benefit the taxpayers in the way that you might think. It's not like, we're gonna send everybody, $30 and they're gonna open it up and be able to, Paul can go to Pizza Hut on his way to the lake house. It doesn't work that way.
It goes into
Could have
two
paid my
towns.
alarm fee.
Right. So, but I will say this, I think we have to be very transparent that what we're really talking about is $539,595 of leeway
How much?
in next year's budget. $539,595.08.
Do that off the 4,500 and the 242?
I took the 782, I took the 242, 404, 92, I took the 200, 877, I took the 4,500, and you're left with 539, 595.
530,
200, 877.
535,
I have 535, my rough math.
Well, I took
You did nothing for the medical
35,095.
reserve?
I took the 782, I took off for the capital, that gives you 539, 595.08.
But then the 45 we just voted on.
Okay, so when you take,
So
that's right,
535
so
we're
you're right, I didn't deduct
So it's
that.
535,095.
535.
Roughly.
Right, is what that amount is. And so, I hope that the taxpayers and that the residents, the school community has confidence in us to be stewards of their tax dollars. But I would be hopeful that we would keep a very close eye on spending. In other words, again, I'm gonna go ridiculous here, but we're not gonna start, busing kids to sporting events that we didn't normally have in the budget. We're not gonna start buying things, doing things. We formulated a budget that was our best estimate. We were very successful, and the towns approved it, and they trust us that we put together a fair budget. And we actually, during the budget process, we kind of kicked around that there's actually no contingency in special ed, and, what would happen, and, and I think that was the year before last, because last year we saw the savings with the bridge program and some of those programs, so we didn't have the same concern. But I guess what I'm saying is that we're still falling off the cliff in enrollment decline, and we should be very mindful and closely monitor this in an appropriate way, if that makes sense to you, that it should be kind of, separate. Does that make sense? And
I
yes,
just want to
you've
make sure I kind of am following your reasoning.
Mhm.
When it goes into the capital reserve fund, it doesn't come out.
Correct.
Right? It's there, it's got to be used for
And
that.
that's what we
And we
always-
have to, right?
Yes.
So So you're getting your 5 whatever by taking something we've already committed, the 4,500, and if we put the capital reserve in
At 1%.
at 1%, then,
That gives us the number that I'm working with.
and
Right.
that's the play number, right? The number where there's play. right?
Correct.
And are you suggesting that the rest be put in these 2 funds?
No, I think
or
that's
are you
where-
suggesting that it go back? I mean, I'm not quite
Okay,
sure.
so what I'm suggesting
you're-
is that, I'm not suggesting we give it back to the towns.
Okay,
But what I am saying is that it seems like, I don't want to speak for Scott, but it seems almost like the recommendation would be to put the money into the pension fund, and that would leave that other number that would probably go into the medical reserve. And what I'm saying is that that would mean that the money appropriated next year for those 2 areas would be greatly aided. And so.
right, and, okay.
And so I just think that we need to be mindful of,
We should treat it as a windfall that we can do what we want with, is what
Right.
you're saying.
Yeah.
So for
well,
clarity,
yeah, and,
just so you know, on the budget object summary that we look at every month, both of these 2 are separate items. The pension is its own item, there's nothing else in there. So we'll see it. We'll actually see, because I won't encumber it and I won't spend 200, 877. So we'll see that as available unspent. So it will be very visible that it's there, and it'll be very visible should we decide to take it. And the same would be true of medical. Whatever amount that we will have funded from this year, I'll deduct from the balance for next year. I'll use that balance from next year to pay, but the part that, whatever dollar amount that we are moving, or pre-funding in essence, would remain as unexpended until such time as you take an action to do something with it.
Right, it's
Question
it's
is
going to require a transfer from.
right.
Right, it would have to be transferred. So it's the 270 line for medical and the 235 line for
So
pension.
where do we stand with respect to the state and the pension for the teachers?
It's done.
The sword hasn't dropped and, until there's a
For
special
good
session.
2 years.
2 years. So we don't need it for that for 2 years.
That special session that was being contemplated in the summer won't touch pension, the pension contribution.
Not supposed to. I think they're gonna talk about tolls.
Not supposed to? So
Yeah,
tolls doesn't
well,
go
no,
through, they're gonna
there's a
come back to
deal,
the town?
there's an agreed upon deal. It would be, could it happen? Yeah, but it would be highly unusual for them to reopen that. So, and many school districts would find themselves in big trouble if something like that happened at this point too, so, I would, highly unusual. So then that's fair. So then I think everyone could, feel assured that we would see transfers if any of that money was going to be reallocated.
So, so let's take the pension for just example. If we were to put 200,877 in the pension out of the surplus from this year, as things stand right now, we would be funding the pension for the 2019-20 year with 401,700.
Only if I also contributed the 1920 amount of it, which I wouldn't intend to do.
So we're just talking about it as a prepayment, but, so when the time comes to make the payment, I don't know where this remaining 200,000, the one that's budgeted is, I don't know how that's.
It sits in that account.
Right, that's
Stays
what
in the
Mike's
budget
talking
in
about.
that account
Doesn't
unspent.
want that 200,000 to get
So, what I was
frittered
gonna
away.
ask, Scott, is that, tell me if I'm wrong, I see this as if it's prudently managed and watched and all the rest of it, it could have a beneficial sort of ripple effect pay in the, like, 2020, 2021 budget? In other words, in future years?
Let's assume we were perfect this year
Yeah.
for 2019, for 1920 in budgeting, to the penny. We should then have this exact same, well, less four,
You have
le-
five-
less,
be-
we should have
We would
530,
be required to
whatever.
have it. Right?
Right,
Because you can only expend in a year what the towns or the people in the town have told you could do. So what would end up happening is the same thing this year. You would have this money left over, and you can't spend more than you were actually allowed to spend. So you have to have this stuff left over. So what you could end up doing,
well, not if we spend it this year, right? We could spend that.
we could
that money
spend it
next year.
this year, and that's part of the reason we're talking about moving it into the pension. I think the idea would be that you're paying that in addition to do that. Or the reserve, you're not actually spending it, you keep it there in case of something bad happening. But you technically, I guess, are not spending it. So,
So the reason I'm asking is I would love to see some of the money that we're talking about putting in the pension now remain, and some that we were planning on contributing next year go in. I'd like to see more than 200,877 go into that pension. Because of the fact that we probably are going to, and this might, to be honest with you, open the way to doing it, rationalize our assumptions maybe a little bit. And so,
Talking about the pension.
yeah, I'm talking about pension. I don't know about the medical fund. It seems to me like we're kind of good there. But I'd love to see 250 go into the pension next year, for next year. So,
250 in addition to what
In addition
was
to- No, no.
already budgeted.
no, an additional 50 to what we budgeted. So,
So by doing what you suggest, prepaying, you're essentially giving yourself and the other thing to keep in mind is that, we're probably not gonna see another year where we are actually maxed out on the capital reserve, like we are.
I don't think we've ever done it.
No, we've never
So
done that.
next year, you might be putting
So-
some of that in
so-
the reserve.
So
Well,
that's
that's what
my
you
point.
would be able to
Right.
do.
That's my point.
Right, and I agree, next year you could put some of that in the reserve, but I would say too that, the flip side of what was suggested in that it could have a ripple effect is that, it could be short-term good and long-term bad. In that, what happens is, so now your health obligations get real easy for this year, and then maybe going into the next year. And then all of a sudden, when you're, formulating your budget the following year, health insurance goes up 15% or something, or 18%. People say, what happened, well, we were, that cushion was in there, and now all of a sudden, there's an 18% increase, and it's really not 18, it's 18 over what you were doing because you had more, and it gets so it can have a short-term advantage, but it could also have a long-term kind of kick.
I would tend to see medical budgeting driven more by claims history than that. I take your point, but I think we would want to smooth that type of thing rather than saying, take this 1 year shortcut by saying we can get by. Because I think better to smooth those kinds of things than have the jagged edges that you described. We got by, oops, now we have a big problem. So I would prefer to see us keep that smooth. I would think that jagged jumps would be driven more by claims experience, sort of like we've seen with the central office.
Right. But what we should, because we've spoke about this before, we should start to see, or we're hopeful that we will see savings in health insurance just based upon the switch to the plans. And as that forecasts out further, we should start doing better there as well. So, but again, I would say we don't have, well, we have three options here. We have a few choices. Again,
can I-
full disclosure, the only other option is you could return.
So can I make a motion that we move $242,404.92 into the capital reserve fund?
Want to take it one at a time? Out of the
Out of the
18,
2018-19,
operating unspent funds.
Yes.
Second.
Okay.
I'll second that.
It's seconded by Vance. Is there any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
All right.
Okay.
so now we have,
So I'll make a motion that we put 200,877 of the excess this year
Unspent funds.
into the pension fund.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Vance and Cheryl. Any further discussion? All in favor? Oh,
just some discussion. So Vance, you were saying you would like to see 50 additional over what we budgeted actually be spent in that?
but we can make that decision
Yeah,
next year.
and the reason, I'm pulling that number out of my head and, or out of the air. The fact is, I think we're going to now feel a little more comfortable taking a harder look, not that we haven't taken
Right.
taking a harder look at the assumptions that we've been
And
making.
those assumptions can, like I said, can drastically change what's going on in terms of
Right, and,
what the.
but
what
looking
they're
at all assumptions, like the salary increase assumption as well as the return assumption. So, I think
It really
that
agrees
story's
with
not
that.
yet told.
The story's not, we're not just parking it there because we have no other place to put it.
Right. It's based on the actuarial recommendation, and as we get further information moving forward next year, we can decide what to contribute next year.
Well, and if you,
Based-
so they'll come up in October with a number for that, that next year's budget, right? But if you, they give you two numbers, so they prepay that. If you prepay that when they tell you in October for the following year, you're paying a significantly lower number than if you waited to July 1st. So you're actually making a savings by, so you're earning money on that money by paying it early
Right,
for the next budget year.
right. So,
I'm not sure
I
how much
don't-
we want to pay
I don't
next
know.
year's budget.
I'm just saying that
But the point
that's
is
why
that-
they give you that number in October.
If we do,
Right.
if we do what the motion suggests, we will have the flexibility to deal with this once all the numbers
Correct.
are.
correct. We have flexibility moving forward
But-
based on more information.
But with the understanding, and Scott is right, that the actuaries also want us to kind of glide into this, because we don't want the herky-jerky.
Right, you want us
Up and
smooth.
down, this year you give nothing, next year you have 300,000, so.
Okay. All in favor?
I-
Any opposed? Okay. So that leaves,
334,218. So I would caution you that
Well,
an estimate of,
it's an estimate. You can just designate the remainder.
yes, if it's all going into that other bucket.
I would
Does anyone
move,
want to make a motion?
sure, I would move that remainder of unexpended funds be allocated, allocated to the medical reserve fund. So,
That number you said was 334?
Correct, currently off that
Two at
70.
one-
218.
21808.
Okay. There's a motion from Chris, is there a second? Seconded by Gwen. Just clarification, Scott, you said the 30's already out. Okay. So,
Just so I'm clear, what medical, this is all medical reserve fund, just Region 9?
just Region 9.
And our share of
Our share of central office?
central office too?
No,
No,
just
We
Region
can't
9.
do
Not
that, we
this
don't have
number.
that
You-
okay.
Just
You're
Region
saying
9.
you already took that out?
I assume
Okay, so,
I guess how would that affect the ongoing contributions? Because that, for the year, you would still propose to put in what we're planning during the year into the health, the Region 9 fund, right? Despite the fact that we're putting this big surplus in.
what I would do is I would deduct, let's say it comes out to 340.
Yep.
I would deduct 340 from this 2,542,826.
Which is the full year Region 9 number, right? I
Well-
see. And then you would reduce our contributions accordingly during the year?
Well, we'd end up with the same net
About-
total dollar for next year. We would just have the 340 at the
I got you.
340 line. We would have that as excess that we would carry in that budget line that we could choose throughout all of next year what to do with that 340.
but it would stay in the medical line.
Stay in the medical line in the budget object, so it would be unexpended budget in the medical line.
So, what were we planning to contribute next year?
For medical, it's the number.
2,542,826.
2.5 million.
It's on that,
It's on this sheet. Okay.
yes.
And so we have the potential to contribute, if we need it, $2,800,000. Is there any way that we're ever gonna need that for, I mean, is,
Have a very catastrophic claims year, yes. You know, 340K in claims could be 1 month. I've seen it happen in some of the other districts, so.
because this one is more troubling to me.
Well,
This one's.
and
it's
that
got
was
more
why the,
More reserve-like
the-
to me.
yeah, that was
even
why
though it
the
is a reserve,
cautionary
yeah.
statements, but, again, I think that it's in that line, and it can't be moved without a transfer, and it's there as the safety net, which is what it's kind of there for. And, we'll have to make that decision at, again, the end of the year again.
Or even through the, we're seeing medical claims running seriously higher, but you
Oh,
could
no,
say,
Scott, we're not getting it.
or alternatively, we see special ed.
States at the beginning of the
Right,
year.
so in
Totally
that case,
jinx
we
it.
would- you'd have to come back to us to make the transfer to fund that line item.
Be an active choice.
Yeah.
If we have the budget, then nobody will.
Okay,
know.
so we have that motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Mr. Coppinger will abstain. I think we need to make, one more motion because I'm a stickler and I think would someone entertain making a motion to, move $30,000 from the unspent, or from the, 2018-19 operating budget into the central office health insurance reserve?
So moved.
Second.
Oh, man, she got knocked out.
Yeah.
Are we moving 30,000, or are we moving a third of the final number?
Okay, so then rather than 30,000, does someone want to amend the motion to say,
1/3.
direct the finance director to,
1/3 of the cost overrun in the medical reserve central office.
very good. Would
And
you,
so I second
Second
that,
the
but
amendment.
so is that gonna have an effect on what
on the
goes
number
into,
that goes into the other, which is why
Which is
Chris-
why
That's why I
we
said
said,
Chris
remainder
left it
on his
as the
remainder.
remainder, so that can
but it's the
fluctuate a
remainder
little bit.
after this as well.
Yes.
Correct,
Okay.
correct. Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, well, we had a lot more complicated thing, and we did it in 20 minutes faster than the meeting I was at last night, which is amazing.
Who moved and seconded that?
That was Paul and Vance.
By the way, can I comment? This,
You may.
the report out on this year was the best report out on a year that I've ever seen, so thank you very much. That
yes, I
really
agree.
was easy to understand, and I appreciate it.
Okay, very good. So, we are on to
B.
item B, consideration for the sale of old technology. So,
We're getting 300.
I think we have these in our packet, is that, or you have something different?
This one is different.
Is it different?
No. Here, everybody have it?
Okay.
I'm not sure.
17 max, 24.
That gets in there, but check to make sure it's not.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
it is the same, it was the last thing.
Yep.
Okay,
So this is a proposal to sell some older technology, 2012 models, 17 proposed iMacs to a firm called Tech Trade Up. Estimated if they are evaluated as B-grade devices, that's the quality level, where they would pay $310 per device, estimated revenue $5,270. The proceeds would go into our technology equipment resale account, which is a separate account, for purposes of holding these amounts. We currently have $3,038 in that account, so a little over $3K. This would bring it to a little over $8K, 8.3K, if this happened the way that it was. So the request is to conduct the sale to get the best price possible for these devices.
okay.
And this is an account we hold,
Yes. Yeah, at the board's direction, I think 2 years ago, there was a separate account that was established for purposes of technology resale. And so expenditure from that fund are only done with board direction.
Is that true?
What do you see as that, let's say you had enough money in there to be useful?
Replacement equipment, I think replacement,
Okay.
in fact, does it say that here?
so should this be a discussion at a budget meeting as well? Anytime we're talking about new technology, we should know
Well-
the balance of this, so we spend it on that?
Well, yeah, okay, so,
Just-
no, it's fair, I have some questions, I don't know if anybody else has questions, I always need to go first, but,
Go ahead.
okay,
We'll
so,
cover everything.
is this time sensitive? Is time of the essence?
I think it's only of the essence to the extent that summer is a good time to do this because you have time to do it outside of the regular day. It's time sensitive in that if enough is raised from this, it could be helpful to augment equipment usable in this upcoming year.
Okay,
But strictly speaking, is it time sensitive? Not really.
okay, because I have some questions, concerns. A, I'm curious, how do these iMacs differ from the iMacs we sold last year? And if you remember the iMacs, we made an exemption in our bylaws to,
Tell them the staff.
correct. And they were iMacs, and the reason I ask is because, again, I want the optics to be right, and I don't think staff paid $310 per device. And so, if these again, I trust everybody, so these are probably different models, newer models, more advanced models, whatever. But I'm somewhat apprehensive to do it, and the optics are such that why did you sell them for less last year, and this year they're more money? Because we should be very careful on that, I just think. Does that make sense?
I understand, but I don't know the prior sale.
And the proceeds from the sale last year, as you just outlined, went into a technology fund and were not spent because we did not approve any
I would have to bring it to
purchase.
you, guidance to, approval to make that expenditure out of that fund.
Right, so that money just went in there last year. So then that leads me to, so why are we selling them now if we're not using the money for new stuff, unless we're just selling them because we think they're worth more now before they get older? Or, in other words, why are we doing that now unless we're using that to replace them with newer equipment?
The budget does, the approved budget for 1920 does have a provision for additional, replacement of computer equipment. So that's already in the budget. I think that the idea here was, and so maybe I should back up the point about the time sensitive. It's kind of normal that summertime is the time that the vendors show up saying, now's a great time to clean out your closets, now's a great time if you want, we'll come by for free, we'll price them on the spot, those types of things. We'll haul for free, whatever it is. Just because they know at the time when you're not in the active thick of things.
Right.
So it occurs at this time because it's top of mind and you have the time to do something with it.
Yeah, no, and I can understand that. I guess,
More than likely, if you didn't do it now, what's the likelihood we would do it later? I mean, it could happen if somebody wants to invest the time.
right, but again, I just think for public awareness, we have 17 iMacs sitting in the basement somewhere in a box,
I don't believe that's true.
so we're using them.
I believe so, and so I'm not close to this. Gina could.
No, I know, and that's why I was wondering whether it's,
But the description is beginning to age out of usefulness, right? And so they're 7 years old. Any computer that's 7 years old is going to be a bit long in the tooth. So I think it's strictly that.
closing my 2011 Air Mac, I'm sorry.
So it doesn't hear anything.
Upgrade?
I can get an extra year. The only thing is, it's this big, I'd
He's
have
gonna
to
have to
walk
plunk
around
one
with
of
the thing.
these things
It's-
right
it's,
on.
you know,
He'll sell it to you for 305.
So, another question, are we prohibited, or are you prohibited from buying 17 replacements from this and knowing that you're gonna replace them and sell them to the vendor? Is this a different vendor than we normally buy from? Yeah?
It's like a recycler or
Yes,
something,
exactly.
isn't that what it was
Exactly.
called last year?
Yeah, they do recycling, and they may either refurb them or use them for parts or
So maybe,
gold out of them.
maybe when we ask in a budget season to replace new or older equipment, we should be asking the question on the board level. So
Get
we're
for a
replacing
trade-in.
this, what's going on with the old ones? What are we selling them for? And get an estimate and then drop that number down, because now this will contribute to, the 3,000 we didn't spend, but we shouldn't be having an account that just keeps accumulating money.
Yeah, so one point on that, just logistically, this is an estimate. It's an estimate of what they'll pay. It's an estimate of their value. So an alternative approach for your consideration is conduct the sale, the money goes into the account and it sits there. Then it's a known quantity. So the question at budget time is, let's assume we get 5K and add it to the 3 that we have. Should we use the 8 that's in reserve and augment the balance in the budget, or not augment the balance in the budget? But consider this a way to accumulate money for funding forward refresh cycles that you either budget for or don't budget for in addition to.
Well, Well, and I don't have a problem with that as long as we know that, I mean, because I think this budget season, I know I didn't think about the 3,000 that we had, collected already. Or I guess assume, well, I didn't assume anything, I just didn't even think about it. So maybe next year, when we're talking about technology, we need to get an update. And I hate to put this on you and add more stuff to you, but the board changes over and we're not good at keeping track of all those things. So if you could bring that forward to everybody, that would be great.
I think too, even though this is gonna sound like it's a crazy extreme demand, obviously it's not task for you, Scott, but I do think that, we have, tech staff in the building, and that we really should have an inventory of all of our computer equipment, what we're doing with it, where it is. When we say something like this, again, because it's unfair to you, because I say to you, where are the 17 iMacs? And you don't know. We're assuming they're being used, but they could be in a box in the basement. We really don't know. And so it's more helpful, I think, to us to know that if we have 17 that are in a box in the basement, they're doing us no good, right? We may as well recycle them and get what we can for them. If we're currently using them, but getting rid of those 17 gets us enough money to get 3 more, then is the trade-off, and that's where we need a tech personnel to say to you, these are obsolete, these are no good, this is what you
I
can
think
do.
you have a director of technology and whatever we call it. It's a fancy title, but it would put no burden on Scott, and we should bring you in the fall, before we get into the budget, the equivalent of a multi-year capital investment specifically on technology. A lot of our hardware is on a rolling lease, which is why stuff comes up at the end of its lifespan. It would be worth knowing the inventory, the application, where they're using them, the degree of usage. We cascade, the teachers' laptops become the laptops that we put into the movable carts, and then when they get to the end of that lifespan, we either sell them at that point or they go sometimes into special ed. So there's, you are getting your best value out of it. But yeah, it should be a separate yearly or bi-yearly presentation to you. We can set that up for the fall.
I just think that would be helpful, but.
Just
yes,
curious, Scott, there's no, typically with financial statement audits, I don't know if it might be different for fund audits, isn't there some kind of physical existence check that the auditors would do, or that the equipment actually exists? Because this would presumably be CapEx for Region 9's books, so to speak, right? So there's no verification of the computer equipment. I mean, not to the level that Mike is suggesting, right? Nobody's gonna go in the basement and check what's in the box, but that it does actually exist. Are there any procedures?
He already has.
Yeah, well, I'm notwithstanding that, Mike. So,
I don't think it is treated as CapEx in a municipal
so then it's,
setting.
that transaction wouldn't be audited per se, or at least on a sample basis that,
Theoretically, any transaction could be sampled, but
okay.
it's not a part of a regular I've observed. I do believe that the people in this building who are responsible for this are very aware of exactly what they have and exactly what they need and that type of thing. So to Tom's point, I think they could probably speak pretty eloquently to all of that, to give some context to this. So don't mistake my hesitancy for their expertise.
Right, and I don't want to seem as though I don't trust the staff, I trust that this is being done the right. I just think optics sometimes is important, and I think information for us is helpful because, again, when you see that there's, I think we liquidated 15 last year, and again, I'm just going off the top of my head, it was somewhere in that neighborhood, 12 to 15 last year, and it's 17 this year. And again, I don't know, did we buy 32 of them in the operating budget, or are we no longer using them where we've transitioned to something else and we bought those? It would just be helpful to know that we're not, again, I trust, but we're not liquidating things that we're using or that we're replacing it appropriately as we are liquidating it. Because if it goes in that fund and we haven't
Well, we have a
approved
few of
anything to
those.
move out, it's basically just been liquidated and we're not using that anymore, so we must not have needed it.
Well, I can tell you that I did have a discussion, a brief one, prior to, just a day or two ago, about this. I know that the desire is to use this for additional purposes immediately. So the conversation that I had was, step one is to do this, step two is to come back with the request. So the request to spend is inherent. It will come as explicit. So this isn't sort of just generic cleaning out the shelves activity. It is oriented towards the desire to do an X purchase. The step that I took in the conversation was to say, we need to separate these as two separate board actions. Step one, approve the sale, conduct the sale. Step two, recommendation for using proceeds of.
So if we use, just call it $8,000, that's gonna be in this account if we approve this sale. If we spend it in the 19-20 school year on new equipment, does that count against the money that we were authorized to spend? So do we get $8,000 less from the town?
No.
Or does this add up being additional funds left over at the end of the year again?
No, because it's stuff you already had and you bought that you basically traded in. You didn't take
I don't know,
additional
that's why I'm asking.
taxpayer funds.
So it's a separate fund, it's not a part of the operating budget.
So it's kind of like what we collect on the parking fees and
Yeah.
things like that.
So I just have a practical question. Who's going to who's going to do the actual selling of these computers?
I believe the way that it works is the company comes, you say, here's my stuff. They look at it and say, that's a grade A, that's grade B, I'll give you this from that, and then you agree to it.
Who's going to be agreeing on our behalf? You, or is it going to be Jeff? Okay.
And
Okay.
we take responsibility for wiping the machines?
They're always cleaned, yeah, they are. I guess my only last question is, what if they're offer you $50 a device? Are you gonna sell them?
It probably depends how much we think they're worth. In other areas, I have done, it's worth it to us to have them take stuff for free, because to us, it's useless, the resale value is, the eBay value is effectively useless. So we treat it as, it's not the donation process, disposal process, one of the processes, where, itemize the items, enumerate them, bring them forward with a recommendation, get the superintendent's approval. They come, they pick them up, and that's the end of it. I am assuming, I haven't had the detailed conversation, but I would assume that we're pursuing this route because we think they have value.
Right. And
We must already think that they're worth something. So if they're gonna say $5, unless we strongly think it's $5 and it's more value to us for them to just haul the doggone thing out, and we'd have been happy if they gave us $3.10, my guess is we'd probably say no, because we feel like we could get better elsewhere.
yeah, well, because I guess my perspective individually would be, if they're gonna try and give you $25 for them, I'd rather donate them to Bridgeport, who could use them as students, than give them to a wholesaler who's gonna buy them for 25 and sell them for 3.10. But that's
So
your decision and the staff's decision moving forward. That's fine.
I'd like to make a motion.
Absolutely.
I move that we approve the sale of these 17 IMAX 2012 models at a price determined appropriate by the administration.
Second.
Okay. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
What happens?
I think it would be a good idea to amend the motion,
For,
Oh,
just for clarity, and proceeds to be deposited in the technology research.
I was gonna chime in, but I thought that was assumed because that's where it goes anyway, but.
That was my motion. I'm sorry.
So we
didn't
can
come
amend
out
it,
all
that,
the way.
Chris, you accept the amending?
Yeah, let me think about that. No,
Okay.
to be determined something.
So, we're back to, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
And what's the name of the county?
Abstention? Okay.
Chris,
It's on
I think Vance moved in, Chris seconded.
Yeah. That is correct.
Yes, that was
Paul's price
Vance
shopping
and then
for-
Chris.
I just
seconded.
price shopped it.
It's in between, whatever, low end,
It's $4.49.
449, low end was one
I
something.
saw one, yeah, 200.
Okay.
Or Mike could buy it for 50.
I trust Jeff.
I still have old
Well,
Blackberries
it
in
all
the
depends
drawer
on
that I was
what you have on.
gonna sell, but I think they're,
Yeah,
be
tell
worth
me.
more money as antiques.
Yeah,
Yes. Another 10 years.
yeah, maybe get more money for it.
Okay, we are on to administrative reports, which was put on the agenda, removed to the agenda, and now has reappeared, so don't shoot the messenger, so.
I have no further administrative reports.
I see we
He's
do have
the best administrator.
a colorful,
No.
I like that administration.
Do you have
Colorful chart,
this is a colorful,
Like the color.
the flow chart.
primary grade,
Put Walter on the spot.
Yeah,
charts.
This is not administrative.
It is part of Stephanie's report, just letting you know about the restructuring, renaming of some of the middle school feeder math courses. She's written you an explanation.
Our advanced mathematic courses will have these colors on there. Of course, options next year.
And I assume the dotted line's moving up, meaning that it's harder to move up.
It's always harder
It is.
to move up.
Go down to a lower level.
It's probably explained very,
It's the same thing.
I do have a
Correct.
question about this. I did read this beforehand. So in substance, Tom, I think what this is saying is that the math program in the 8th grade in both Reading and Easton are comparable, and that this is just an intent to align curriculum so that when we get them in 9th grade, they're equal, right? Or that, I guess in other words, what I'm trying to say is, are the students we get from Reading Easton, is there any distinction in the quality of their education when they come into math? Like, does one group have to catch up more than others? And is this trying to get at avoiding any gap when we get them in 9th grade?
There's not a wide distinction by town, and it's more to do with, in the concept of the middle school, culling kids out and calling them honors in 8th grade is inconsistent with what we want to do. We still do have kids that are, in math in particular, are they cognitively, developmentally ready to be doing abstract algebra as 8th graders? And if they are, then they'd be taking what we're now going to call, I think, core,
Plus.
yeah, versus formerly intro to algebra, formerly algebra or honors algebra. So it's just a pathway distinction?
But this is essentially what we're doing now anyway.
Yes, right.
So it's just a title, basically.
Yep, mostly it's the title.
we can, if you have, questions, we can ask Stephanie
Yep.
next month, because my understanding is that the two districts offer different math courses with similar,
But it would be alignment between
well,
those.
there's similar alignment, but I don't think there's direct, and so, I think they're moving towards that, and that's, so you could ask where we are in the
Stephanie
process and how it's
Okay, so
changing,
you
because
would
they
never
offer
go
different
past
courses,
two.
so. Scott, you want to talk some more?
I've covered everything
Very brief. Today I attended a training conference on school safety and security run by the Department of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. About 20 districts represented, and we're going through what should your plan have, and what don't you have. And I'm coming out of that conference very confident that we have a really well-developed plan. In terms of some of the oohing and aahing of other districts, they're like, what? I didn't even know we needed that, and we already have stuff in place. So we're feeling that we've done some good advance work. We don't have to report to the state until November, but Scott has made April, May the time when we update our plans, and we've done that in each of the 5 buildings, so kudos to you. There is more work for us to do, and we will, but it was a good affirmation of our readiness.
I would just augment that to mention very strong working relationship with the police in the towns, which leads to a lot of that, because they're very proactive and we have very open conversations. Very helpful.
Okay. We are on to Board of Education committee reports. I'm not sure whether there are any reports other than we'll put Mr. Carpenter on the hot seat, but I'll help him out because I think we should kind of provide a little update of the
So-
project.
So the construction project, as you can tell, we are in the process of moving forward. All the granite curbing is parked in the 2 parking lots, one back here and the one up here. They've started on that. They've started on the track, and they have dismantled the tennis courts. I think the priority for them right now was to get started on the reclamation of the track surface, because there's curing time, to be able to get that done and moving forward properly in the correct time schedule that Scott has agreed to, and, well, the committee really agreed to, with the contractor. We hold meetings on Monday afternoons at 3. The contractor also comes on Thursdays, and the engineer comes down to monitor the progress and make sure that everything's being done the way they expect it to be. And I believe that everything's moving along fairly smoothly. I did notice today that there were quite a few parents who were on the tennis courts, which they were watching lacrosse on the field next to it. So I don't think it's safe for them to be there, so I would like to speak with the contractor and make sure, because they're in charge of actually fencing off areas so people don't get access to them. And I saw that the road sign out there said the road was closed, but people were, in the back of the school, people were coming in this way. I think we want to make sure that we understand who's responsible for what. The contractor has the insurance, so if something happens, then it's, I think they're holding some responsibility in terms of liability, because there are designated things that they're responsible for. The sites that the public has access to over the summer are going to be changing. Walter's going to be putting up signing to change that as it goes on, but they're responsible for cordoning off areas. And then, as far as I know, everything's moving forward. I've missed the last meeting of last Monday. So if there's anything I missed,
Yeah,
Scott?
rain has been a bit of a challenge. Really, we're in the 2nd week of heavy-duty construction. We'll start in earnest Monday. Had heavy rain for several of those days. They did work last Saturday to make up some time. So they're broadly on schedule. There's no major warning signs of any issues. Might be a day here, day there kind of thing, but.
But they started on Saturday early because they're anticipating, well, I wouldn't say anticipating, problems, but they want to be on top of everything.
Yeah, and it was,
They do not want to get behind.
yeah, and it was very much driven by, as you said, the longest pole in the tent at the moment is getting to the point that they can pave the stadium track.
Right. Because there's curing time for the asphalt underneath the track surface.
Right, before you can put the track surface down, I think it's 21 days?
Yeah.
21
It
days.
was 28 was one product, and I think they found another comparable product that's 21 days. So, they wanted to make sure that they were going to, fall in that window, that they would have the track cured. As Scott said, they are slightly behind because of the rain, but they have committed to an additional crew starting Monday to try to make up some of that lost time on the curbing, so that they can still fall within the timeline that we've designated. I would also add to what Paul's saying, in that it's kind of unusual that a lot of times when you do these type of projects on a school complex during the summer, you close the whole complex and you say everything else is at the other schools or whatever, you take the staff, like everybody goes somewhere else and you just close it down. And it's more difficult here because we have more things that go on, I think, than a lot of the other districts. But I would urge parents who may be watching us on Channel 78 and on YouTube as well, that we should be as mindful as we can that it's a construction site, and there are dangers. There's inherent dangers that are out there, and we can say, well, it's on the contractor. They're supposed to, rope it off, but a lot of that is on us as residents as well, to be respectful and to know that, and I question too, and maybe Scott or Tom can connect with Mike on this as well, is this the only field where lacrosse can practice in this given week? Or could they be at John Reed Middle School or at Helen in other words, I know they're typically here, and that's the thing that is always there. Well, we're always there, but is there a way to say that, you're at this field for these month and a half, or you're at that field
I
because...
was surprised to see it today. So.
Yeah, well, because, if they get an email from the coach saying, practice on this field on Thursday...
Is that youth lacrosse? Because lacrosse is not, like high school
No,
lacrosse
it's
isn't
some sort
happening
of a,
right now.
And I don't know who...
Football is happening. but
We
things are
obviously
very-
know who's on the fields, right? We don't, because we monitor that stuff. And
Yeah.
so, again, I'm not advocating for a total ban. I'm advocating for maybe a closer look at whether or not we can
Things we
relocate some of these.
Things we can do to reduce traffic, and certainly
Well,
younger students that aren't Barlow kids even.
Yeah, well, because, you have cars coming in, guilty as charged. I pulled in down Barlow Drive, but I come in every day, so I know what's kind of going on and where the big holes are. But really, people are going around cones, coming in, parking next to granite curbing that's piled up, and, plunking one kid down and taking the other kid over to the lacrosse field, and there's dangers there, and the complex should be as closed as, reasonably possible, and we should try to limit that exposure to the contractors and to dangers, more importantly, dangers to the kids.
But can we close this front parking lot where everybody's still parking? I mean,
It's
that would
closed.
be, like,
It
you
is
guys all
closed.
parked there
That's what I'm
tonight.
saying.
Closed, I didn't,
Drive around cones, they drive through,
so
No,
we need
Didn't you
to,
guys all park there?
I
I
parked in
did
the
not
back.
park
I
there.
parked in the back.
I parked there
I
because,
wanted the
well,
signs instead of said
Well,
no
when
room.
people see cars parked there,
No, no, no.
they're gonna keep parking there. If
No,
they
okay,
have it
guilty as
coned off
charged.
and there's nobody parked there, people will go park in the back. Just come down Turney Road, park in the back.
No, you're right, guilty as charged. However, I will say, I came in that way to kind of look and see what was happening, And when I pulled down in that parking lot, there must have been 30 cars
Yeah, there
already
were.
parked in there. And so.
I
we-
had no
you know,
idea you weren't supposed to.
And you
Where they came
you
from.
can't block it off because Suzanne wouldn't be able to get to her house.
No, I mean, like, as you come up Barlow Drive, when you approach the parking lot where you would make the right into the U-shaped parking lot, you should not be able to park in the front. That will, maybe people will come up Barlow Drive once, but once they realize, I can't park here anymore, that will naturally divert them to Turney, I think, just behaviorally.
Hopefully, you know,
If,
off at night,
yeah.
our experience has been, no matter what we do with it at night,
You can't put heavy
Yeah.
equipment in front of it?
no.
There you go.
They can.
Well, I mean, we
They
could,
have it. You
we
can't.
could put horses.
Oh, fire engines,
block access.
right,
Right,
Fire.
fire engines.
yeah.
Is it fair to say that we agree that this is a problem now and a potential worse problem later, and we need to deal with it? What do you think?
Yeah,
Up
we don't
to-
wanna beat
up
a
to
drum,
and
but
in-
yeah.
And including, you know, just prohibiting, like, look, if necessary, prohibiting use of the facilities by outside groups. If
When
we-
Mike is back on Monday,
Yeah.
we'll go through the food construction meeting.
Yeah, and, well, right.
I got it.
The AD may need to get the word out more strongly than perhaps he
And we
can.
can put, we do have barriers that are
Yeah.
movable, that are crosswalks are movable.
Right.
Right.
No, the sign that says road closed
The cops
didn't stop me, but
It didn't stop anybody I saw.
a horse would have done.
Well, if you put horses across, they'd go up into Suzanne's yard and go around it. I mean,
Okay, well, that's all right.
Small price to pay.
it's just what
Move on,
happens,
please.
but.
Yes, move on, we get it. Let's move on.
Suzanne can stand out there.
Okay, so I'm all done.
A dead sawhorse or? Okay,
Puns just can. No, stop, please.
Of course, we're gonna have to move all of these meetings to the cafeteria.
we are on to
Board members
public
can't
comment.
expect to walk away.
Does anyone want to stand in front of the camera again and make another public comment? Hearing none, board member comments. If you have a board member comment, raise your hand. Seeing none,
He's picking up speed.
we will recess to executive session. Does someone want to make a motion to recess to executive session for discussion of the superintendent's evaluation, and we will invite Dr. McMorrin.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
Thank you very much.
Good night, folks.